Prime Minister, I wish to make a brief statement. The subject we're about to discuss is the utmost seriousness. Expect the discussion to be focused on the facts and the issues at hand, and not on personal attacks against individual members. While certain criticisms may be made about the government collectively, Erskine May, paragraph 21.24, makes clear that any accusations against individual members about lying or misleading the House may only be made on a substantive motion. They may not be made as part of an exchange on the statement. The House rule on this is in place to ensure that members focus on the substantive matters under discussion, and if the debate is needed on matters of individual conduct, that must be drawn in the proper terms with notice. I encourage all members to engage in respectful debate, and our constituents would expect. I therefore now come to the statement. Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to provide the House with information that I now have about the appointment of Peter Mandelson as our ambassador to the United States. But, Mr. Speaker, before I go into the details, I want to be very clear with this House that while this statement will focus on the process surrounding Peter Mandelson's vetting and appointment, at the heart of this, there is also a judgment I made that was wrong. I should not have appointed Peter Mandelson. I take responsibility for that decision, and I apologise again to the victims of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who were clearly failed by my decision. Mr. Speaker, last Tuesday evening, the 14th of April, I found out for the first time that on the 29th of January 2025, before Peter Mandelson took up his position as ambassador, the Foreign Office officials granted him developed vetting clearance against the specific recommendation of the United Kingdom security vetting that developed vetting clearance should be denied. Not only that, the Foreign Office officials who made that decision did not pass this information to me, to the Foreign Secretary, to her predecessor, the Deputy Prime Minister, to any other minister, or even to the former Cabinet Secretary, Sir Chris Warmold. I found this staggering, and therefore last Tuesday, I immediately instructed officials in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office to urgently establish the facts on my authority. I wanted to know who made the decision, on what basis, who knew, and Mr. Speaker, I wanted that information for the precise and explicit purpose of updating this House. Because this is information I should have had a long time ago. And it is information that this House should have had a long time ago. It is information that I and the House had the right to know. I will now set out a full timeline of the events in the Peter Mandelson process, including from the fact-finding exercise I instructed last Tuesday. Before doing so, I want to remind and reassure the House that the government will comply fully with the humble address motion of the 4th of February. Mr. Speaker, in December 2024, I was in the process of appointing a new ambassador for Washington. A due diligence exercise was conducted by the Cabinet Office into Peter Mandelson's suitability, including questions put to him by my staff in Number 10. Peter Mandelson answered those questions on the 10th of December, and I received final advice on the due diligence process on the 11th. I made the decision to appoint him on the 18th of December. The appointment was announced on the 20th, and the security vetting process began on the 23rd of December 2024. Mr. Speaker, I want to make clear to the House that for a direct ministerial appointment, it was usual for security vetting to happen after the appointment, but before starting in post. That was the process in place at the time. Mr. Speaker, this was confirmed by the former Cabinet Secretary Sir Chris Warmold at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee on the 3rd of November 2025 when he gave evidence. Sir Chris made clear, and I'm quoting him now, when we are making appointments from outside the civil service, the normal thing is for security clearance to happen after appointment, but before the person signs a contract and takes up post. At the same hearing of the same select committee, the former permanent secretary to the Foreign Office, Sir Ollie Robbins, said, and I quote again, Peter Mandelson did not hold national security vetting when he was appointed, but, he went on, as is normally the case with external appointments to my department and the wider civil service, the appointment was made subject to obtaining security clearance. Mr. Speaker, after I sacked Peter Mandelson, I changed that process so that now an appointment cannot be announced until after security vetting is passed. Mr. Speaker, the security vetting was carried out by UK Security Vetting, UKSV, between the 23rd of December 2024 and the 28th of January 2025. UKSV conducted vetting in the normal way, collecting relevant information as well as interviewing the applicant, in this case, on 2 occasions. Then on the 28th of January 2025, UKSV recommended to the Foreign Office that developed vetting clearance should be denied to Peter Mandelson. The following day, on the 29th of January 2025, notwithstanding the UKSV recommendation that developed vetting clearance should be denied, Foreign Office officials made the decision to grant developed vetting clearance for Peter Mandelson. To be clear, for many departments, a decision from UKSV is binding, but for the Foreign Office, the final decision on developed vetting clearance is made by Foreign Office officials, not UKSV. However, once the decision in this case came to light, the Foreign Office's power to make the final decision on developed vetting clearance was immediately suspended by my Chief Secretary last week. Mr. Speaker, I accept that the sensitive personal information provided by an individual being vetted must be protected from disclosure. If that were not the case, the integrity of the whole process would be compromised. What I do not accept is that the appointing minister cannot be told of the recommendation by UKSV. Indeed, given the seriousness of these issues and the significance of the appointment, I simply do not accept that Foreign Office officials could not have informed me of UKSV's recommendations whilst also maintaining the necessary confidentiality. Sensibly flagging UKSV recommendations while protecting detailed sensitive vetting information to allow ministers to make judgments on appointments or on explaining matters to Parliament. So let me be very clear. The recommendation in the Peter Mandelson case could and should have been shared with me before he took up his post. Mr. Speaker, let me make a second point. If I had known before he took up his post that UKSV recommendation was that developed vetting clearance should be denied, I would not have gone ahead with the appointment. Mr. Speaker, let me now move to September 2025, because events then and subsequently show with even starker clarity the opportunities missed by Foreign Office officials to make the position clear. Mr. Speaker, on September the 10th, Bloomberg reported fresh details of Mandelson's history with Epstein. And it was then clear to me that Peter Mandelson's answers to my staff in the due diligence exercise were not truthful, and I sacked him. I also changed the direct ministerial appointments process So full due diligence is now required as standard. Where risks are identified, an interview must be taken pre-appointment to discuss any risks and conflicts of interest, and a summary of this should be provided to the appointing minister. I also made clear that public announcements should not now be made until security vetting has been completed. Mr. Speaker, in light of the revelations in September of last year, I also agreed with the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Chris Warmold, that he would carry out a review of the appointment process in the Peter Mandelson case, including the vetting. He set out his findings and conclusions in a letter to me on the 16th of September. He advised me in that letter, and again I quote, "The evidence I have reviewed leads me to conclude that appropriate processes were followed in both the appointment and the withdrawal of the former HMA Washington." When he was asked about this, Mr. Speaker, last week, the then Cabinet Secretary was clear that when he carried out his review, the Foreign Office did not tell him about the UK SP recommendation that developed vetting clearance should be denied to Peter Mandelson. I find that astonishing. As I said out Odyssey, I do not accept that I could not have been told about the recommendation before Peter Mandelson took up his post. I absolutely do not accept that the then Cabinet Secretary, an official, not a politician, when carrying out his review, could not have been told that UKSB recommended that Peter Mandelson should be denied developed vetting clearance. It was a vital part of the process that I had asked him to review. Clearly, he could have been told, and he should have been told. Mr. Speaker, on the same day as the then Cabinet Secretary wrote to me, so that's the 16th of September 2025, the Foreign Secretary and the then Permanent Secretary of the Foreign Office, Sir Ollie Robbins, provided a signed statement to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. The statement says, and again I quote, "The vetting process was undertaken by UK Security Vetting on behalf of FCDO and concluded with DV clearance being granted by the FCDO in advance of Lord Mandelson taking up post in February." It went on to say, and again I quote, "Peter Mandelson's security vetting was conducted to the usual standards set for developed vetting in line with established Cabinet Office policy." Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear to the House. This was in response to questions which included whether concerns were raised, what the Foreign Office's response was, and whether they were dismissed. Mr. Speaker, that the Foreign Secretary was advised on and allowed to sign this statement by Foreign Office officials without being told that UKSB had recommended Peter Mandelson be denied developed vetting clearance is absolutely unforgivable. This is a senior Cabinet member giving evidence to Parliament on the very issue in question. Mr. Speaker, in light of further revelations about Peter Mandelson in February of this year, I was very concerned about the fact that developed vetting clearance had been granted to him. Not knowing that, in fact, UKSB had recommended denial of developed vetting clearance, I instructed my officials to carry out a review of the national security vetting process. As I set out, I do not accept that I could not have been told about UKSB's denial of security vetting before Peter Mandelson took up his post in January 25. I do not accept that the then Cabinet Secretary could not have been told in September 2025 when he carried out his review into the process. I do not accept that the Foreign Secretary could not have been told when making statements to the Select Committee again in 2025. But, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, the fact that I was not told even when I ordered a review of the UKSB process is frankly staggering. And I can tell the House that I've now updated the terms of reference for the review into security vetting to make sure it covers the means by which all decisions are made in relation to national security vetting. I've appointed Sir Adrian Fulford to lead the review. Separately, I've asked the Government Security Group in the Cabinet Office to look at any security concerns raised during Peter Mandelson's tenure. Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in our system in government, that is not how the vast majority of people in this country expect politics, government, or accountability to work. And I do not think it's how most public servants think it should work either. I work with hundreds of civil servants, thousands even, all of whom act with the utmost integrity, dedication, and pride to serve this country, including officials from the Foreign Office, who, as we speak, are doing a phenomenal job representing our national interest in a dangerous world, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and all around the world. This is not about them, but yet it is surely beyond doubt that the recommendation from UKSV that Peter Mandelson should be denied development clearance was information that could and should have been shared with me on repeated occasions, and therefore should have been available to this House and ultimately to the British people. And I commend this statement to the House.
Kevin Baird, not Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. His reputation is at stake. Everyone is watching. It is finally time for the truth. Earlier today, Mr. Speaker, Downing Street admitted that the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House. The Prime Minister has chosen not to repeat that from the dispatch box. I will remind him that under the Ministerial Code, he has a duty to correct the record at the earliest opportunity. The Prime Minister says he only found out on Tuesday that Peter Mandelson failed the security vetting. The earliest opportunity to correct the record was Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, almost a week ago. This is a breach of the Ministerial Code. Under that code, he is bound to be as open as possible with Parliament and the public in answering questions today. So let me start with what we do know. We know the Prime Minister personally appointed Peter Mandelson to be our ambassador to the United States. We know that Mandelson had a close relationship with a convicted paedophile. We know that he had concerning links with Russia and China, links that had already raised red flags. We know that the Prime Minister announced the appointment before vetting was complete, an extraordinary and unprecedented step for the role of US ambassador. The Prime Minister says that it was usual for this because it was a political appointment. So I will remind him and the rest of the Labour front bench who are heckling that Peter Mandelson was a politician who had been sacked twice from government for lying. That meant he should have gone through the full security process. And we also know, finally, Mr. Speaker, that when Peter Mandelson failed the security vetting, he was allowed to continue in the role with access to top secret intelligence and security information. This goes beyond propriety and ethics. This is a matter of national security. So let me turn to what we do not know. We still do not know exactly why Peter Mandelson failed that vetting. We do not know what risks our country was exposed to, and we do not know how it is possible that the Prime Minister said repeatedly that this was a failure of vetting, went on television and said things that were blatantly incorrect, and not a single advisor or a single official told him that what he was saying wasn't true. At every turn, with every explanation, the government story has become murkier and more contradictory. It is time for the truth. There are too many questions to ask in the allotted time, Mr. Speaker. So I'm now going to ask the Prime Minister just 6 questions, and I have taken the unprecedented step of providing these questions to the Prime Minister in advance. So he has them in front of him. And I have asked for these questions to be put online for the public. They and I expect him to answer. The Prime Minister appointed a national security risk to our most sensitive diplomatic post. Let's look at how this happened. The Right Honourable Gentleman told me at PMQs in September 2025 that full due process was followed in this appointment. We now know that in November 2024, Lord Case, the then Cabinet Secretary, told him this process required security vetting to be done before the appointment. He did not mention any of what Lord Case said in his statement earlier. So first question, does the Prime Minister accept that when he said on the floor of the House that full due process was followed, this was not true? Secondly, on the 11th of September last year, journalists asked his Director of Communications if it was true that Mandelson had failed security vetting. These allegations were on the front page of a national newspaper, and yet Number 10 did not deny the story. Why? 3. Will the Prime Minister repeat from the dispatch box his words last week that no one in Number 10 was aware before Tuesday that Mandelson had failed his vetting? The Prime Minister says he's furious that he wasn't told the recommendations of the vetting. Yet on the 16th of September, a Foreign Office Minister told Parliament, and I quote, "The national security vetting process is rightly independent of ministers who are not informed of any findings other than the final outcome." This was the government's stated process. So why is the Prime Minister so furious that it was followed? On the 4th of February 2026, the Prime Minister, 5th question, Mr. Speaker, on the 4th of February 2026, the Prime Minister told me from the dispatch box that the security vetting he had received had revealed Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. How could he say that if he had not seen the security vetting? And finally, Mr. Speaker, Sistema is a Russian defense company closely linked to the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin's war machine. Was the Prime Minister aware before the appointment that Peter Mandelson had remained a director of that company long after Russia's invasion of Crimea? Mr. Speaker, everyone makes mistakes. It is how you face up to those mistakes that shows the character of a leader. Instead of taking responsibility for the decisions he made, the Prime Minister has thrown his staff and his officials under the bus. This is a man who once said, "I will carry the can for the mistakes of any organization I lead." Instead, he has sacked his cabinet secretary. He has sacked his director of communications. He has sacked his chief of staff. And he has now sacked the permanent secretary of the Foreign Office. All of these people fired for a decision he made. The Right Honourable Gentleman's defence is that he, a former director of public prosecutions, is so lacking in curiosity that he chose to ask no questions about the vetting process. He asked no questions about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. He asked no questions about the security risk Mandelson posed. Apparently, he didn't even speak to Peter Mandelson before his appointment. It doesn't appear that he asked any questions at all. Why? Because he didn't want to know. He had taken the risk. He had chosen his man. Whitehall had to follow. It is the duty of the Prime Minister to ensure he is telling the truth. Or does the Ministerial Code not apply to him? I'm only holding the Prime Minister to the same standard to which he held others. On the 26th of January 2022, the Right Honourable Gentleman said to a previous Prime Minister at this dispatch box, if he misled the House, he must resign. Does he stand by those words, or is there one rule for him and another for everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, let me respond to those points. Firstly, when I found out what had happened on Tuesday evening last, I wanted to have answers to the question who made the decision to recommend, to give clearance on developed vetting contrary to the advice, why that was done, and who knew about it, so I could provide the information to the House, Mr. Speaker. That is the exercise that's been conducted since Tuesday evening and today, so that I could come here today to give the full account to the House, which I've just set out. Mr. Speaker, she asked me about developed vetting security clearance after the appointment. I've set out that wasn't me saying that. I read out the evidence of the former Permanent Secretary about that and the former Cabinet Secretary in relation to that. And I think the quotes that I've given to the House are clear enough in relation to that. She also asks why Peter Mandelson failed. Mr. Speaker, it's important to make a distinction between the information provided to the review and the recommendation. The information in the review must be protected and has been protected, because otherwise the integrity of the entire system would fall away. But the recommendation doesn't need to be protected and should not have been protected. Mr. Speaker, in relation to her questions, in relation to the answer about full due process, that was the information that I had, that I put before the House, and it was confirmed to be by Sir Chris Warmall, because in September I asked him to conduct a review of the process to assure me that the process was correctly carried out. He did that and wrote to me on the 16th of September, giving me that his conclusions. In relation, Mr. Speaker, to reports in the media, Number 10 was repeatedly asked about the facts surrounding Peter Mandelson's clearance, and was assured that the proper process was followed in that case. Mr. Speaker, in relation to those in number 10, let me give the answer. Nobody in number 10 was informed about UKSV's recommendation. Mr. Speaker, just to be clear and for the record, the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary did receive information recently and then sought the necessary and legal advice. Once those checks were completed by the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary, I was told, that is in the last 2 weeks or so, that was entirely the right procedure, to get the legal advice and then to bring it to my attention at the first opportunity. It was the right procedure that was followed by my officials in the last few weeks. Mr. Speaker, in relation to why I was furious about the process, for the very reason, Mr. Speaker, I strongly believe I should have been given this information at the very outset. I strongly believe there were repeated times when I should have been told. I should have been told on appointment. I should have been told when Peter Mandelson was sacked. The Cabinet Secretary should have been told when he reviewed the process. The Foreign Secretary should have been told before she was asked to sign a statement to the Select Committee. And I should have been told when I ordered a review of vetting, Mr. Speaker. In relation to the point she makes about what I said in February in answer to a question of hers, I make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, I had not seen the security vetting file. I did not know that UKSV... The question asked me about vetting. I knew about the due diligence, and that's why I put before the House what I knew about the due diligence in relation to Epstein. The question asked me about vetting, and I knew what the due diligence has said, and therefore I told the House what the due diligence has said. I didn't tell them what security vetting had said because I hadn't seen the file in relation to that. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the particular details in relation to Peter Mandelson, I acted on all of the information that I had available to me. The simple fact of the matter is I should have had more information. I didn't have that information. The House should have had that information, and I've now set it out in full to the House.
Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that my committee did ask. We asked on the record, and we got a partial truth that could hardly be the whole truth. But we are on record as asking the very questions that hecklers on the other side say should have been asked. And the answers are there on the record to see just what we got when we did ask. Mr. Speaker, may I just turn to my question? A month before Mandelson's appointment was announced, The then Cabinet Secretary advised that the necessary security clearance should be acquired before confirming a political appointment. That doesn't seem to have been the usual practice. I'm glad that it's changed because it was clearly abused. Because what happened was that somebody, probably Peter Mandelson himself, leaked to the press his appointment as US ambassador, effectively bouncing the government into confirming it. But then when the confirmation did come forward about his appointment, it did not make clear that it was subject to vetting in either the offer letter to Peter Mandelson or in the government's press release. I'm afraid to say, doesn't this look like, for certain members of the Prime Minister's team, getting Peter Mandelson the job was a priority that overrode everything else, and that security considerations were very much second order?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank her for her question? Her committee did ask relevant questions, and that's why I have indicated that it was unforgivable that the Foreign Secretary was asked to sign a statement in response to those very questions without being told about the recommendation. The questions were asked. She was asked to advised and asked to sign a statement without being told the relevant information, and that is unforgivable. As for the appointment before developed vetting, I've changed that process now so that it can never happen again, and she heard me quote the evidence of the former Cabinet Secretary and the former Permanent Secretary in relation to that. Mr. Speaker, can I just deal with the third point she makes? And that is that somehow the Downing Street's wish to appoint Peter Mandelson overrode security concerns. Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. If I had been told that Peter Mandelson or anybody else had failed security and had not been given clearance on security vetting, I would not have appointed them. A deliberate decision was taken to withhold that material from me. A deliberate decision was taken to withhold that material. This was not a lack of asking. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. It was a decision taken not to share that information on repeated occasions.
Sir David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's 2022 all over again. Back then, when he stood on this side of the House, it was Boris Johnson who was accused of misleading Parliament and scapegoating senior officials. The then Leader of the Opposition couldn't have been clearer. The public need to know, he said, that not all politicians are the same, that not all politicians put themselves above their country, and that honesty, integrity and accountability matter. So he promised change, Mr. Speaker. He promised to break the cycle and stop the chaos. And he promised a government with, and I quote, more focus on long-term strategy, not the short-term distractions that can animate Westminster. I'm afraid the fact that he even had to make the statement today shows how badly he has failed. How badly he has let down the millions of people across our country who are so desperate for change. He blames his officials. He says he had no idea. He gives every impression of a Prime Minister in office, but not in power. The facts remain, even on his own account. The Prime Minister appointed Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, even after he had been warned about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The Prime Minister announced the appointment before Mandelson had been vetted, despite the clear risk to national security of putting someone unsuitable in that role. And one of his top officials, just 3 weeks into the job, clearly believed the Prime Minister wanted Mandelson to be appointed regardless of what the vetting process turned up. And the Prime Minister has relied on the vetting process to defend his decisions. So why did he ask so few questions personally about the vetting process itself? We all know the truth, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister knew that appointing Mandelson was an enormous risk. He decided it was a risk worth taking. a catastrophic error of judgment. And now that it's blown up in his face, the only decent thing to do is to take responsibility. Back in 2022, the Prime Minister rightly accused Boris Johnson of expecting others to take the blame while he clung on. That was not acceptable then, and it's not acceptable now. So I hope the Prime Minister can at least tell the House this, and we'll be listening very carefully to his answer. Was he given advice by Simon Case, the then Cabinet Secretary, that the necessary security clearances should be acquired before he confirmed his choice for US Ambassador? And did he follow that advice? Yes or no? Mr. Speaker, after the years of chaos under the Conservatives, we needed a government focused on the interests of the people, the cost of living crisis, the health and care crisis, our national security. We needed a government of honesty, integrity and accountability. So will the Prime Minister finally accept that the only way he can help to deliver that is to resign?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I set out in my statement the full facts. And in September, when the Bloomberg emails came to light, I asked the Cabinet to review the process, then Cabinet Secretary to review the process. He told me the process was as it should have been. And as soon as the information about security vetting came to light last Tuesday, I asked for the facts to be established so I could update Parliament. He asks me about the announcement before developed vetting. He's heard the evidence that I've given to the House from the former Cabinet Secretary and from the former Permanent Secretary. In relation to the advice from Simon Case, Mr. Speaker, when I asked the former Cabinet Secretary to review the process after September 25, he specifically addressed whether the process had been followed by referencing the Simon Case letter and assured me that the process was the right process to have followed. So in answer to his question, that was specifically looked at by Sir Chris Wormold in the review that was conducted in September of last year.
Dame Diana. Sorry, Diana, but...
The Prime Minister has gone on at considerable length about process and procedure, but ordinary people don't really care about process and procedure. They want transparency and they want to know that they can have confidence in the words of elected politicians, like all of us in this chamber. On the question of Peter Mandelson, it was in the 90s that Peter Mandelson had to resign for the Cabinet for the first time because of his dealings with the millionaire Geoffrey Robinson. It was a few years later he had to resign for the Cabinet for the second time because of his relationships with the billionaire Hinduja family. Peter Mandelson has a history. Peter Mandelson has a history. And what this House wants to know is why, knowing Peter Mandelson's history, going back now 30 years, and given what has been known, it's one thing to say, as he insists on saying, nobody told me. Nobody told me anything. Nobody told me. The question is, why didn't the Prime Minister ask?
Mr. Speaker, in relation to her question, let me be clear. I should not have appointed Peter Mandelson. As soon as the further revelations came to light, I asked the Cabinet Secretary to review the process so I could be assured about the process. He wrote to me on the 16th of September, setting out the conclusions of that review and assuring me the process had been followed properly.